The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty street of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. But Jeremiah Zimmerman barely flinched as he leaned against the saloon post, watching another man get dragged away by the sheriff for starting trouble he couldn't finish. It was the spring of 1877, and this town had seen better days. Jeremiah had drifted into Scottsbluff 3 years back, working odd jobs on nearby ranches, breaking horses mostly, keeping to himself like a shadow that nobody noticed until they needed something heavy lifted or a wild stallion tamed. He was 27 years old, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled at his collar, eyes the color of creek water after a storm. Women in town sometimes looked at him with interest, but he never looked back. There was something hollow inside him that he figured no woman would want to bother filling. The loneliness had settled into his bones like winter cold, the kind that never quite left even when spring arrived. He had no family left, not since the fever took his mother and sister back in Missouri 10 years ago, and his father had died in the war before that. Jeremiah existed more than he lived, going through motions that had become as automatic as breathing. That particular afternoon, he'd come into town for supplies when he noticed the crowd gathering near the church. Curiosity pulled him closer, though he told himself he didn't care what fool entertainment these people had cooked up now. When he got close enough to see, his stomach turned sour. A mail-order bride auction. He'd heard of such things but never witnessed one. Women stood on a makeshift platform, looking various degrees of resigned, hopeful, or terrified. Most were older, harder-looking women who'd clearly lived rough lives and were seeking any port in a storm. The town's bachelor farmers and widowers called out bids with the same enthusiasm they'd show for livestock. Jeremiah was about to turn away in disgust when he saw her. She stood at the end of the line, so small and still she might have been invisible if not for her dark hair catching the afternoon sun. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with pale skin that suggested she hadn't been out west long. Her dress was faded blue calico, clean but worn thin in places, and she kept her eyes fixed firmly on the ground as if trying to disappear into the wooden planks beneath her feet. Something about the way she held herself, like a bird with a broken wing trying not to be noticed by predators, made Jeremiah's chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. The auctioneer, a portly man with too much pomade in his hair, gestured toward her. "This here is Miss Tabitha Vaughn, fresh from Pennsylvania. She's a quiet one, good with needlework and reading. Starting bid is $50. The crowd murmured, but nobody raised a hand. Jeremiah watched as color flooded Tabitha's cheeks, her humiliation visible even from where he stood. "Come now, gentlemen, she's young and healthy, $45. The auctioneer's voice carried false cheer, still nothing. Jeremiah felt anger rising in his throat. These men were passing her over like she was damaged goods, probably because she looked too timid, too fragile for the hard life out here. They wanted women who could plow fields and birth babies without complaint, not someone who looked like a strong wind might carry her away. $40. Surely someone wants a wife who can read and write. That's valuable, men." Tabitha's hands were trembling now. She clutched them together at her waist, and Jeremiah saw her blinking rapidly. She was trying not to cry in front of everyone. Something in him cracked open then, that hollow place suddenly filling with something hot and protective and entirely unexpected. Before he could think better of it, his hand shot up. $100. The crowd went silent, heads swiveling toward him. The auctioneer's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Well now, Mr. Zimmerman, that's quite generous. Anyone want to counter?" Nobody did. These men weren't going to spend that kind of money on a woman they'd already dismissed. Jeremiah stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. What the hell was he doing? He barely had $100 to his name, and he certainly hadn't planned on getting married today or any day. But when Tabitha finally lifted her eyes to look at him, there was such relief mixed with confusion in her pale green gaze that he knew he couldn't back out now, even if he wanted to. The transaction was completed quickly. Jeremiah counted out his money with steady hands despite the chaos in his mind, and then the preacher was there, asking if they wanted to marry right away or wait. Jeremiah looked at Tabitha, who stood beside him now, still trembling slightly. "That's up to the lady," he said quietly. "But maybe we should talk first." The preacher nodded knowingly. "You've got 3 days to make it legal, per the arrangement. After that, the marriage must be completed or the woman goes back up for auction." Jeremiah felt Tabitha flinch beside him. "There won't be another auction," he said firmly. "We'll be married within 3 days." He led her away from the crowd, very aware of her small presence beside him. She came up to his shoulder and she moved with careful, precise steps like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. They walked in silence to the boarding house where he kept a room, and he could feel her nervousness radiating like heat. Inside the boarding house parlor, he gestured to a worn settee. "Please sit." Tabitha sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She still hadn't spoken a word to him. Jeremiah pulled a chair over and sat down, keeping a respectful distance between them. "My name is Jeremiah Zimmerman," he started, though she surely knew that already. "I work breaking horses mostly, some ranch hand work when it's available. I've got a little money saved, not much. I rent a room here, but I've been looking at some land north of town, thinking about building something permanent." She nodded slightly, her eyes on her hands. "I didn't plan on bidding today," he continued, feeling like he owed her honesty. "I didn't even know there was an auction until I saw the crowd. But when I saw you up there and nobody would bid, I couldn't walk away." Tabitha's voice, when she finally spoke, was so soft he had to lean forward to hear. "That was very kind of you." "It wasn't kindness," Jeremiah said, surprising himself with the truth. "Well, maybe partly, but mostly I just couldn't stand watching them treat you like that." She looked up then, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "You spent $100 on me. That's more money than I've ever seen at once. It's just money. It comes and goes. Not for people like me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need to be honest with you about who you've bound yourself to. I'm not strong like the other women. I get sick easily. I'm afraid of horses. I can't shoot a gun or work a field. All I can do is sew and read and cook simple meals. You could have gotten a much better wife for your money." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in and they finally burst free. Jeremiah saw tears tracking down her cheeks now, and she wiped at them angrily. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Pennsylvania. My parents died of consumption, and I had no other family. A woman alone back east can't make a living except in ways I didn't want to consider. So I signed up for the bride program, thinking at least I'd have a home and a purpose. But standing up there today, having all those men look at me and find me wanting, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. And now you've paid all that money, and you're going to realize it too." Her voice broke on the last words, and she covered her face with her hands. Jeremiah felt something shift in his chest, that hollow place filling up more with each passing second. He'd spent 3 years feeling nothing much at all, and now this woman he'd known for less than an hour was making him feel everything at once. He moved to sit beside her on the settee, still leaving space between them, but close enough that she'd know he wasn't disgusted or angry. "Miss Vaughn, look at me please." She lowered her hands slowly, her face blotchy from crying, I'm not disappointed, I'm not angry, and I don't think I made a mistake." He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "You want to know what I saw when I looked at that platform? I saw a bunch of scared women being treated like cattle, and one woman in particular who looked like she'd break into pieces if one more bad thing happened to her. That woman was you." Tabitha opened her mouth, but he held up his hand gently. "I'm not done. I also saw someone young who'd clearly been through hell but was still standing, still trying. You came all the way across the country alone, knowing you'd probably end up married to a stranger because you were brave enough to try for something better. That's not weakness, Miss Vaughn. That's strength." "But I can't do anything useful," she protested weakly. "You can read and write, which is more than I can do well. I can barely scratch out my name. You can sew, which means we'll have decent clothes. You can cook, which means we'll eat better than the slop I usually make. And you're honest enough to tell me your limitations instead of pretending to be something you're not. That's useful to me." She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand. Why would you choose someone like me?" The question hung in the air between them, and Jeremiah realized he didn't have a simple answer. He looked at this small, frightened woman and tried to put into words something he barely understood himself. "Because when I saw you up there, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years. I felt like I mattered, like what I did made a difference. I've been drifting for so long, Miss Vaughn, just existing day to day with no real purpose. And then suddenly there you were, and I had a choice to make that actually meant something. I could walk away, or I could try to help. I chose to help. Maybe that's selfish of me, using your situation to make myself feel useful, but that's the honest truth." Tabitha was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "You're a very strange man, Mr. Zimmerman. I've been called worse." A tiny smile ghosted across her lips, the first he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger and less haunted. "You've been honest with me, so I'll be honest with you. I'm terrified of this whole situation. I don't know you at all. You seem kind, but I've known men who seemed kind at first and turned cruel. I don't know if I can be a proper wife. I don't even know what that fully means out here." "That makes two of us then," Jeremiah said. "I don't know how to be a husband. Never thought I'd be one. But maybe we can figure it out together, take it slow. We don't have to rush into anything beyond the legal ceremony. We can get to know each other first, like normal courting folks do, just in the wrong order. You'd be willing to do that? Wait, I mean. Miss Vaughn, I just spent my savings on you without thinking it through. I reckon I can wait as long as you need to feel comfortable. I'm not an animal, despite what some might think of cowboys." She laughed then, a small, startled sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. You've been kinder to me in the last hour than anyone has been in the last 2 years. You can call me Jeremiah, seeing as we're going to be married. Then you should call me Tabitha." They sat together in the boarding house parlor as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, talking quietly. Jeremiah learned that Tabitha had been 21 when her parents died, that she tried to make it on her own for a year working as a seamstress, but could barely afford rent and food. She'd seen an advertisement for mail-order brides and had signed up in desperation, arriving in Nebraska just 2 weeks ago. "They kept us in a house in Omaha," she explained, her voice steadier now. "There were 15 of us at first. The stronger, prettier girls got matched quickly and sent to various towns. The rest of us got put on the circuit. This was my 3rd auction." Jeremiah felt anger rise again at the thought of her being paraded around like this. "You won't have to go through that again." "No, I suppose not. Though I'm trading one uncertain future for another. At least this one comes with someone who won't let you starve or freeze." She looked at him with those pale green eyes, and he saw the first hint of trust beginning to form. "I believe you mean that." "I do." They were married 2 days later in the small church, with the boarding house owner and her husband as witnesses. Tabitha wore the same faded blue dress, and Jeremiah had bought a new shirt for the occasion, dark blue and stiff with newness. The ceremony was brief, the preacher rushing through the words like he had somewhere more important to be. When it came time to kiss his bride, Jeremiah hesitated, seeing the fear flash in Tabitha's eyes. Instead of kissing her lips, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Hello, wife," he whispered, and felt her relax slightly. "Hello, husband," she whispered back. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Patterson, had prepared a small meal for them in the dining room. It was a kind gesture, and both Jeremiah and Tabitha appreciated not having to face a crowd at the saloon, which was where wedding celebrations usually happened. As they ate roast chicken and potatoes, Jeremiah explained his plan. "I've been saving to buy land. With what I have left, I can put a down payment on those 20 acres north of town. There's a creek running through it and some good timber. I can build us a cabin before winter comes." "Where will we stay until then?" Tabitha asked, cutting her chicken into small, precise pieces. "I was thinking we could keep my room here for you, and I'll sleep in the stable. It's not ideal, but it's proper, and it gives us time to adjust without pressure." Tabitha set down her fork. "Mr. Zimmerman, Jeremiah, that's very considerate, but you shouldn't have to sleep in a stable. We can share the room. I trust you to keep your word about taking things slow." He was surprised by her offer, and something warm spread through his chest. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Besides, we're married now. People would talk if you slept elsewhere, and that would make things harder for both of us." So they shared the small room at the boarding house, with its single bed and worn quilt. That first night, Jeremiah lay on his back, rigid as a board, trying not to take up too much space. Tabitha was equally stiff beside him, and he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," he said into the darkness, thinking conversation might ease the tension. Her breathing slowed slightly. "It's greener than here. Lots of trees and hills. Wetter too. I used to hate the rain, but now I miss it. Everything here is so dry and brown. It gets green in spring, along the creek beds especially, and when it does rain, everything smells fresh and alive. Do you like it here?" "In Nebraska," Jeremiah considered the question. "I didn't think much about liking or not liking it. It was just where I ended up. But yeah, I suppose I do. There's something about the openness, the sky going on forever. Makes you feel small, but also like you've got room to breathe. I felt small in Pennsylvania too, but in a different way. Like I was being crushed by walls closing in. No walls out here, just horizon. That's frightening in its own way." "I suppose it is." They talked until Tabitha's voice grew drowsy, and eventually she fell asleep. Jeremiah lay awake longer, listening to her soft breathing, feeling the warmth of another person beside him for the first time in years. It wasn't attraction exactly, not yet, but it was connection, and that was something he'd forgotten he needed. The next morning, Jeremiah went to the land office and put down payment on the 20 acres. The agent, a thin man with spectacles, seemed surprised that Jeremiah was suddenly in the market for family land. "Heard you got yourself a bride at the auction," the agent said, counting out the money. "Bold move, Zimmerman." "Sometimes life requires bold moves," Jeremiah replied evenly. He spent the next several days working his regular jobs while also beginning to prepare for building the cabin. He borrowed tools, arranged for timber, and hired 2 other cowboys he knew to help with the heavy work in exchange for whiskey and future labor from him. Tabitha, meanwhile, settled into life at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson took a liking to her and put her to work helping with mending and cooking in exchange for reduced rent. Jeremiah would come back each evening to find his wife sitting in the parlor with needle and thread, her head bent over some garment or another. "How was your day?" Became their evening ritual. Broke a horse for the Thompson Ranch. Mean bay stallion that thought he was tougher than me. "I won," Jeremiah would report, and Tabitha would smile. "I repaired 6 shirts and 2 dresses. Mrs. Patterson says I have a gift for invisible mending." Tabitha would respond, and Jeremiah would nod approvingly. They were like two strangers learning a dance, careful not to step on each other's toes. At night, they would lie in bed and talk in the darkness, sharing pieces of their pasts in small, digestible portions. Jeremiah learned that Tabitha's mother had been a school teacher before marrying, and had taught Tabitha to read by age 4. Tabitha learned that Jeremiah's father had been a farmer before the war, and that Jeremiah remembered very little about him except that he'd had kind eyes. 3 weeks into their marriage, something shifted. Jeremiah came back to the room with a split lip and bruised knuckles from breaking a particularly aggressive horse. Tabitha took one look at him and sprang into action, fetching water and clean cloth without being asked. "Sit down," she ordered, her voice firm in a way he hadn't heard before. He sat surprised and let her clean the blood from his face. Her hands were gentle but efficient, and she worked with focused concentration. "You need to be more careful," she said quietly. "What if this horse had done worse? Horses are what I know. Sometimes they fight back." "Well, I don't like seeing you hurt." Their eyes met, and Jeremiah saw something in her gaze that made his breath catch. Concern, yes, but also something deeper. She cared. This woman who had been a stranger a few weeks ago actually cared about his well-being. "I'll be more careful," he promised. "See that you are. I'm just getting used to having you around." That night, Jeremiah woke to find Tabitha pressed against his side, her head on his shoulder. She was still asleep, clearly having moved unconsciously toward warmth and comfort. He barely breathed, not wanting to disturb her, his heart hammering in his chest. Slowly, carefully, he put his arm around her, and she settled deeper into sleep with a small, contented sound. Something fundamental changed that night. They were no longer two strangers sharing space. They were becoming something more, something neither of them had quite anticipated. The cabin building began in earnest in May. Jeremiah and his 2 helpers, ranch hands named Billy and Tom, worked dawn to dusk felling trees, stripping logs, and laying the foundation. Tabitha would ride out in Mrs. Patterson's cart, bringing lunch and water, staying to watch the progress. "It's going to be beautiful," she said one afternoon, standing in what would become their main room. The walls were only waist-high, but the shape of it was clear. "It's going to be small," Jeremiah corrected, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But it'll be sturdy and warm. Small is fine, I like small. Less space to feel lost in." He smiled at that, understanding what she meant. Tabitha had been finding her footing over these weeks, becoming less timid and more present. She laughed more easily now, and though she was still quiet by nature, she no longer seemed like she was trying to disappear. One evening in early June, they were sitting by the creek near their land, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Tabitha had her shoes off, her feet in the cool water, and Jeremiah sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Can I ask you something?" Tabitha said suddenly. "Anything. Do you ever regret it? Bidding on me, I mean." Jeremiah turned to look at her, this woman who had somehow become the center of his world in just 2 months. "Not for a single second, even though I'm not what you expected." "Not that you expected anything, I suppose, since you didn't plan it." "Tabitha, you're exactly what I didn't know I needed. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Now I wake up and actually care about what the day brings. I have something to work toward, someone to build a life with. How could I regret that? She was quiet for a moment, her feet making small ripples in the creek. I was so scared that day on the platform. I thought my life was over, that I'd end up with someone cruel or indifferent. And then you raised your hand, and I didn't know what to think. You looked so serious and stern. I always look stern, it's just my face, she laughed. I know that now, but then I wasn't sure if I was being rescued or traded to a different kind of trouble. And now I know I was rescued by someone who's become my friend. And maybe something more if you're willing. Jeremiah's heart stopped and then started again faster. Something more. Tabitha turned to face him fully, her cheeks pink but her gaze steady. I've fallen in love with you, Jeremiah. I didn't mean to. I wasn't even sure I was capable of it after everything that happened. But somewhere between your kindness and your patience and the way you talk to me like I matter, it just happened. He stared at her, this brave, beautiful woman, and realized what had been growing in him all these weeks. Tabitha, I love you too. I think I started falling the moment you asked why I'd choose someone like you, because the answer was so obvious to me even then. I'd choose you because you're you. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and they sat there by the creek as the sun sank lower and the stars began to appear. When Jeremiah finally kissed her, really kissed her, it was sweet and tender and full of promise. The cabin was finished by mid-July, a solid structure with 2 rooms, a fireplace and real glass windows that Jeremiah had traded 2 months' worth of work for. They moved in on a hot summer day, their few possessions loaded into a borrowed wagon. Mrs. Patterson hugged Tabitha goodbye with tears in her eyes. You take care now and come visit whenever you're in town. I will, I promise. Thank you for everything. Their first night in the cabin, they christened it properly. Jeremiah carried Tabitha over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they consummated their marriage on a real bed that Jeremiah had built with his own hands. It was tender and awkward and perfect, 2 people learning each other in the most intimate way. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Tabitha traced patterns on Jeremiah's chest. I never knew it could be like this. Like what? Good. Loving. I'd heard stories from other women about duty and pain, but this was different. Jeremiah kissed her forehead. That's because this is real. We're not just going through the motions. We love each other. We do, don't we? It's still strange to think about. 2 months ago we were strangers. Best $100 I ever spent. She swatted his arm playfully. You're terrible. You love me anyway. I do. God help me, I really do. Life settled into a rhythm through the summer and into fall. Jeremiah worked the land and took jobs breaking horses, slowly building their savings. Tabitha kept the cabin immaculate, sewed goods to sell in town, and tended a small vegetable garden she'd started. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy, swimming in the creek on hot days, reading together in the evenings by lamplight, making love under the stars when the night was warm by October. Tabitha suspected she was pregnant. She told Jeremiah one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand immediately moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. My mother died of consumption, but childbirth killed her mother and sister. I'm not strong, Jeremiah. You're stronger than you think, and I'll be with you every step. We'll get the doctor from town, and Mrs. Patterson knows midwifery. You won't be alone. Promise. I promise. Winter came hard that year, with snows that piled high around the cabin and winds that howled through the cracks. But inside, they were warm, the fireplace burning steadily and their love keeping the cold at bay. Tabitha grew rounder as the months passed, and Jeremiah found himself more in love than he'd thought possible. On a cold March night in 1878, their son was born after a long, difficult labor. Tabitha screamed and bled and pushed for hours while Jeremiah held her hand and prayed to a God he wasn't sure was listening. Mrs. Patterson and the doctor worked efficiently, and finally, as dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," the doctor announced, wrapping the infant in clean blankets. "Strong lungs on this one." Tabitha lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. When Jeremiah placed their son in her arms, she looked down at the tiny red face and started to cry. "We made him," she whispered. "We made a whole person. You made him. I just helped a little. No, we made him together. He's ours." They named him Joshua after Jeremiah's father. He was a healthy baby, loud and demanding and absolutely perfect. Jeremiah had never felt more purpose than he did watching his wife nurse their son, or walking the floor at night while Joshua fussed, or simply staring at the tiny fingers and toes and wondering at the miracle of it. Tabitha recovered slowly from the birth, and Jeremiah hired a young woman from town to help with the heavy work for a few weeks. But Tabitha was determined, and soon she was back on her feet, managing the household while caring for Joshua with fierce devotion. "You're a good mother," Jeremiah told her one evening, watching her rock their son to sleep. "I'm trying to be. He deserves the best I can give. He has it. He has you, and that's everything." As Joshua grew from infant to toddler, Tabitha bloomed in a way Jeremiah had never expected. The timid woman from the auction platform was gone, replaced by someone confident and strong. She still had her quiet moments, still preferred small gatherings to large ones, but she was no longer afraid of her own shadow. "You remember asking me why I'd choose someone like you?" Jeremiah asked one afternoon as they watched 2-year-old Joshua chase chickens around the yard. "I remember. I was so certain you'd made a mistake. I knew even then that you were special. I just didn't know how much. You've made me happier than I ever thought I could be, Tabitha. You and Joshua both." She leaned against him, his arm coming automatically around her shoulders. "You saved my life that day, you know. Not just from a bad situation, but from giving up on everything. I was so close to just disappearing, to letting myself fade away. And then you saw me. I'll always see you." In 1880, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Tabitha's green eyes and Jeremiah's dark hair. They named her Rose, and Joshua was immediately smitten with his baby sister, bringing her wildflowers and trying to share his toys with someone too small to appreciate them. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick livestock and lean times. But Jeremiah and Tabitha faced it all together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. They added onto the cabin as their family grew, creating more space, more rooms, more life. In the spring of 1883, Tabitha stood on their porch watching Jeremiah teach 5-year-old Joshua to ride a gentle mare while 3-year-old Rose played with a wooden doll at her feet. She was 30 years old now, and she looked nothing like the frightened girl on the auction platform. Jeremiah caught her eye and smiled, that rare, full smile that he saved just for her, and she felt her heart swell with love. She thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, to this place, to this man. If someone had told her 6 years ago that she'd find happiness, that she'd find love, that she'd find herself, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was, in a life she'd built with a man who'd chosen her when nobody else would. A man who'd seen past her fears and her weakness to the strength she didn't know she had. A man who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. That evening, after the children were asleep, Jeremiah and Tabitha sat on their porch watching the sunset, his arm around her and her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life is from what I expected. How grateful I am that you bid on me that day. Best decision I ever made. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't? If you just walked away?" Jeremiah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think about it sometimes. I think I would have lived, kept drifting, kept existing, but I wouldn't have really been alive. Not like this. Me either. I think I would have ended up with someone cruel or died or just faded away into nothing. You gave me a life worth living, Jeremiah. We gave each other that. You made me whole again, Tabitha. I didn't even realize how broken I was until you started putting the pieces back together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the house, Joshua called out in his sleep, and Tabitha started to rise, but the boy settled again. "I want more," Tabitha said suddenly. "More what?" "More of this. More life, more love, more children if we're blessed with them. More mornings waking up next to you and more evenings watching the sunset. I was so afraid of life before, Jeremiah. I just wanted to survive, but now I want to live." "Really live?" He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll live every day as fully as we can together." And they did. Over the years that followed, their family grew to include 2 more children, another boy and another girl. Their ranch expanded as Jeremiah's reputation as a horse trainer grew and Tabitha's sewing business flourished. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Joshua grew tall and strong like his father, taking over more of the ranch work as Jeremiah's back began to ache from years of hard labor. Rose became a teacher in town, much to Tabitha's delight, following in her grandmother's footsteps. The younger children were still finding their ways, but they had time and love to guide them. Jeremiah and Tabitha grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, but their love never wavered. They still sat on the porch every evening when weather allowed, still talked in the darkness before sleep, still reached for each other in the night. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, Jeremiah took Tabitha back to Scottsbluff, to the site where the auction had been held. The church was the same, though the town had grown around it. 20 years, Tabitha said, standing where the platform had been. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago. We were different people. Do you remember what I asked you? Why would you choose someone like me?" Jeremiah pulled her close, their bodies fitting together perfectly after all these years. "I remember. And I'd answer the same way now as I tried to then. Because you're brave and strong and kind. Because you make me want to be better. Because loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Because when I look at you, I see home." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears, the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming love. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see the man who saved me, not from the auction, though you did that too, but from myself, from my fear, from a life half lived. You saw me, Jeremiah, really saw me, and you chose me anyway." "I'd choose you again," he said firmly. "Every day in every life I'd choose you." They kissed there on that dusty street where their story had begun. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built a love that would last beyond their lifetimes. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends to age and illness, celebrated grandchildren being born, weathered financial hardships and personal trials. But through it all, Jeremiah and Tabitha remained each other's constant, each other's home. When Jeremiah was 55, he was thrown from a particularly spirited horse and broke his leg badly. The doctor said he'd always walk with a limp after that, and his days of breaking horses were over. Jeremiah struggled with the loss, feeling useless and old. It was Tabitha who pulled him through, as she always did. "You've spent 30 years breaking horses. she said firmly, helping him into his chair by the fire. "You've earned the right to slow down. There are other things you can do. Joshua can handle the physical work now. You can manage the business end, train Joshua and the boys in your methods. You're not useless, Jeremiah. You're just entering a new chapter. I don't like being dependent. You're not dependent, you're healing. And even if you were, so what? I was dependent on you for years when we first married. Did you love me less for it? Of course not. Then give yourself the same grace you gave me. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me." So he did, learning to accept help with as much grace as he could muster. His leg healed, though Tabitha had been right about the limp. But he found purpose in other ways, teaching his sons and grandsons the art of reading horses, managing the ranch accounts, and spending more time with his wife. "You know what's funny?" Tabitha said one evening as they sat on their usual spot on the porch. They were both in their 60s now, weathered and worn but still together. "When we married, I was the weak one, the one who needed saving, but we've traded that back and forth over the years, haven't we? Sometimes you needed saving, sometimes I did. That's what partnership is," Jeremiah replied, his hand finding hers automatically. "Taking turns being strong for each other. We've had a good life, haven't we? The best life. Better than I ever dreamed possible." Tabitha squeezed his hand. "Do you remember that first night when we lay in bed at the boarding house and I was so scared? You asked me about Pennsylvania to distract me from my fear. I remember. You talked about rain and green hills. You made me feel safe that night, and every night since. That's a rare gift, Jeremiah. Safety, not just physical but emotional, knowing I could be myself, all of myself, and you'd still love me. There's no version of you I wouldn't love." She turned to look at him, this man who'd been her husband for over 30 years, and saw the same kindness in his eyes that had been there when he first raised his hand at the auction. Age had weathered him, work had worn him down, but his core remained unchanged. He was still the man who'd seen a scared woman on a platform and decided she was worth saving. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts entwined, two souls that had found each other in the chaos of life and built something beautiful. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the ranch and town, living lives made possible by the love story that had started with an auction and a $100 bid. As twilight deepened into night, Jeremiah and Tabitha remained on the porch, neither wanting to break the perfect peace of the moment. They talked softly about memories and dreams, about the grandchildren and the future, about nothing and everything. No regrets. Jeremiah asked, a question they'd asked each other countless times over the years. "Not a single one," Tabitha replied, the answer always the same. "Me either. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Tabitha. And you're mine, my savior, my partner, my love." They went inside eventually, arms around each other, still perfectly matched after all these years. The next morning would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish. But for now they had this, the quiet completion of another day lived fully together. The ranch continued to thrive under Joshua's management, with Jeremiah providing guidance and Tabitha keeping the household running smoothly. Rose visited often with her own family, and the younger children were establishing themselves in various trades and pursuits. The family that had started with two strangers at an auction had grown into something vast and beautiful. On their 40th anniversary in 1917, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 15 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, the oldest of whom was a serious boy of 5 named after Jeremiah. "Look at what we made," Tabitha said, surveying the crowd gathered in their yard. All of this came from us. All of this came from you being brave enough to step on that platform, and me being lucky enough to see you there, Jeremiah corrected. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and deep in love. Jeremiah's limp was more pronounced, and Tabitha tired more easily than she once had, but they still took their evening spot on the porch whenever possible, still reached for each other in the night. Their son Joshua stood to make a toast. His own children gathered around him. My father likes to say that the best decision he ever made was bidding on my mother at that auction in 1877. But I think the best decision was actually made by both of them, every day since. They decided to love each other, to work together, to build this life we're all lucky enough to share in. They taught us what real partnership looks like, what real love looks like. So here's to 40 more years. I don't know about 40 more, Jeremiah called out, laughing, but we'll take what we can get. The party lasted into the evening, filled with food and laughter and love. When everyone had finally left or bedded down in various rooms of the expanded house, Jeremiah and Tabitha found themselves alone on the porch again, their favorite place in the world. 40 years, Tabitha marveled. When I stood on that platform, I couldn't imagine 40 days, let alone 40 years. Do you ever think about what you asked me that first day? Why I'd choose someone like you, sometimes. Usually when I'm feeling grateful for how things turned out. Want to know something? I knew the answer even then, but I didn't have the words for it. I'd choose you because my heart recognized you. Some part of me knew, even in that moment, that you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 40 years, this man could still make her cry with his words. That's beautiful, Jeremiah. It's true. Every word. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. The night was warm, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. I'm tired, Tabitha admitted softly. Not just tonight, but in general. These old bones are wearing out. Mine too, but we've got some life left in us yet. I hope so. I want to see young Jeremiah grow up and meet more great-grandchildren. I want more sunsets with you. Then that's what we'll have. As many as we're given. Tabitha leaned her head against Jeremiah's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the stars wheel slowly overhead. This was happiness, she thought. Not the excitement of youth or the passion of new love, though they'd had both. But this deep, abiding contentment that came from a life well lived with a partner who'd walked every step beside you. They were given 7 more years together. 7 more years of sunsets and grandchildren, of quiet mornings and comfortable evenings, of love that had only deepened with time. When Tabitha passed peacefully in her sleep at age 78, Jeremiah held her hand as her breathing slowed and stopped, and he wept for the loss of his other half. But even in grief, he was grateful. Grateful for every moment they'd shared, every word spoken, every touch exchanged. They'd had 47 years together, 47 years that had started with a desperate woman on an auction platform and a lonely cowboy who'd somehow found the courage to raise his hand. Jeremiah lived for 3 more years after Tabitha's death, surrounded by the family they'd built together. He spent those years telling stories to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they knew the love story at the foundation of their family. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew, he'd tell them. She came west with nothing, stood on that platform scared to death, and then built a life that touched all of you. And she asked me once why I'd choose her. The answer was simple, because she was extraordinary and I was smart enough to see it. When Jeremiah died at 81, sitting in his chair on the porch facing the sunset, His family laid him to rest beside Tabitha under an oak tree on their land. The marker read, Jeremiah and Tabitha Zimmerman, two souls, one love, eternal. Their story passed into family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of the lonely cowboy and the timid bride who'd found each other at an auction in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and built a love that lasted beyond death. It became a touchstone for what was possible when two people chose each other, day after day, year after year, building a life together one moment at a time. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and that oak tree where Jeremiah and Tabitha rested became a place where their descendants would bring their own loves, telling the story of how it all began. How sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments, from brave choices made in desperate times, from seeing the worth in someone when others look away. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some swore you could still hear them on the porch, talking softly as the sun went down. Two voices blending together in perfect harmony, the cowboy and his bride, forever home in each other's hearts. The final words carved into the base of that oak tree, added by Joshua years after his parents had passed, perhaps summed it up best. He saw her, he chose her, she asked why. He showed her every day for 47 years, this is love. And indeed it was.